Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another VES-Artex Academy webinar. Today, we're speaking with Karl Burgi about utilizing farm data to improve hoof health. Throughout the presentation, you're more than welcome to ask questions through the question and answer section at the bottom of your screen or through the chat feature as well. We'll be touching base on the questions at the end of the presentation. So thank you, Karl, for joining us again. We're really excited, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's my pleasure to be on here again and talking a little bit about utilizing farm data to improve hoof health. And with that, I also want to give a little overall picture about what goes right with hoof health, what goes wrong with hoof health. So in the overview, we're going to look at the big picture. We're going to look at what's happening, understanding the lesion life cycle, collecting hoof lesion data. So we need to collect data, analyze this data for the 4 main lesions, even though we're going to talk mostly about 3, establish an action plan, and then look at the key performance indicators. So when we look at lameness around the world, and I think it's only normal to look at it. This was done in 2015. These are all cited studies. And we can see here that 25%, around 25% average lameness. I think it's gotten a little bit better, but we still have to remember that in some of those places, even we had in the US, we had multiple. We had one in Wisconsin at 13. We had one at 22.5, and then we had one in the Northeast US that was much higher. The other thing here is with the study that was actually included in there was in Wisconsin, was that Wisconsin herds at that time produced 90 pounds, 41 kilos of milk per cow per day. So where cows get lame is quite clearly. Sole ulcers always happen in the outside claw, this particular place. White line lesions happen the same way. We're going to talk about the causes. Toe ulcers are there. Digital dermatitis is back here, and foot rot is right there. The 3 we're going to talk about it mostly is digital dermatitis, sole ulcers, white lines, and foot rot. So digital dermatitis, foot rot, and the other 2. So why do cows become lame? Okay. We have the environment, we have the walking surface, walking distance. So we're going to talk more about this. Cow comfort, free stall, heat abatement is going to be a high focus on this presentation. Management, time budgets also have to do with it. Lameness identification, lameness treatment and prevention. And then we have stockmanship, cattle handling, using of backing gates or crowd gates in the milking parlor, and the hoof trimming, over trimming, improper therapeutic procedures. Not going to talk much about that because we have just a little bit on that to talk about. So when we look at data, this is quite interesting. So from all over the world, Yasuki here with total herd management system in Hokkaido in 2016 and 17, collected data from 30 farms, 4,000 cows. And you can see here with this, and this was just on dairy comp. And what we can see here that sole ulcers, white line lesion, and digital dermatitis accounted for 70% of the total lesions. And we have foot rot here, toe ulcers, interdigital dermatitis or the interdigital hyperplasias or corns and other stuff. But the 3 main ones we're going to look at a little bit closer. And another thing is in 2013, my friend Jeff Dufresne from Simpro collected data in the Southwest from 17 dairies from 630 cows up to over 9,000 cows, and looked at layman trim events. And in that particular thing, they saw that this is in days in milk. You can see here that as an example, in the first to 60 days, foot rot was highly prevalent. And we know because cows come to the dry period, they calf in, they have a suppressed immune system, and they can't fight off that infection that just happens in those 30, 40 days of lactation. And we can see just about any data set that shows kind of the same thing. The other thing to take notice here is digital dermatitis, white line lesions, and sole ulcers. You know, they're right in there and that. And here also we had some toe ulcers in the mark. So, but you can see all the way through. Here there's mostly trims, so the trims were done between 120 and 180 days, mid-lactation trims. Not that many trims, but we got an even spread out on this data. And the other thing is about this data, it showed very clearly there was an increase in lameness in late summer in the fall, and that's what we're going to look at a little later. I want to just show this a little bit because this is a farm we're going to talk about quite a bit through this presentation. And we collected data there from 2002 to 2007. And when we look at the black line here, the black line is temperature and humidity index, and the blue line is lameness. And what we see here that there's always a 2 months lag time basically for the peak of lameness. And you can see here as the heat, in some cases, the heat is more spread out over longer days. We have a wider spread in lameness. If we just have a peak and it comes down like in 2003, you know, it goes up and goes back down. So this data for a lot of years has given us a lot to think about why this is happening, but it was not until the recent years, I would say the last 4 or 5 years, that we really did more work into it, and that's what I want to show a little bit more. On this same farm, we look at here this is the same farm before an expansion happened in 2018, moved in, and you can see here on the end here again in September, October, we had a little peak of lameness, and you can see here we have sole ulcers, white lines, and digital sole ulcers, white lines, and toe ulcers and sole fractures at this particular day. Here we can see it by days in milk, and you can see by days in milk at this particular dairy, we did extremely well in early lactation. We had some problems when it got to later lactation, so that could have something to do with it. But the other thing I want to show you now is the 5-year before the expansion, what happened over the 5 years. You can see here sole ulcers started going down a little bit, and there's some improvements that were made onto the old facilities before the expansion. But again, we were overcrowded. You can see the white lines kind of are the blue ones. The white lines kind of didn't improve that much. And part of that was because we had mattress barns, we had organic bedding, slippery floors. And you can see the foot rot was worse 1 year over another year. But it got a little worse in 2015, 16, and in this time period, we had kind of a digital dermatitis problem. We'll come back to that. So when we look at the need for hoof lesion preventions, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but when we look at white line lesions, if there's no lesion in the first lactation, a very small amount have lesions in the second lactation. If there's a lesion in the first lactation, there's like a 3-fold increase in the second lactation. So lesions do reoccur. And that's why it's crucial to prevent. When we look at sole ulcers, it's kind of the same way. No lesions in the first lactation. In the second lactation, what actually happens is we get about a dozen. But then if there's a lesion in the first lactation, you can see that's almost a 4-fold increase of sole ulcers in the second lactation. And kind of very similar to digital dermatitis, and we've known that since about 2015. So a very small chance that we get digital dermatitis if the heifer calves without digital dermatitis. But if she already has digital dermatitis in the first lactation, it's going to go up in the second lactation, and even there's more in the first lactation. So with that, what we want to look at it, how do we collect this data? And to get good data, we had to simplify the lesion recording. Years ago, we had zones and multiple things. And when we work with bilingual people all over, we train them. We can see here, it's a very simple approach to sole ulcer, to sole lesions. And we have sole ulcers are always where the start is, because as we identify that, we know where to look. Toe ulcers and thin soles are the same way. Anything in the toe, it doesn't matter if it started at the white line, will always be recorded as a toe ulcer. And that's just for the simplicity of problem solving afterwards. And then you see the white lines. White lines are generally the outside hind claws. Front, we go on both sides. But the other thing we have to understand is that 95% of all the lesions that we talk about here are really on the hind feet, on the rear feet. When we go to digital dermatitis, in general, people just identify or record the acute lesions that they treated. To sometimes really manage a hoof bath successfully, it's really important that we record the stages, the stages as I have them here. Generally, the D4 or the M4 is rarely is not an acute stage at all. This is the D5 is a subacute. It goes from here to the D3 again, and those are the two lesions that we need to treat early. And then the foot rot. So basically, for me, again, 3 lesions. If there's a fourth one, 3 clawhorn lesions or 2 clawhorn lesions. If there's a fourth one, on some farms, we can record it, or we should record it, but we don't want to make it too complicated, because the more we record, the more cloudy our analysis get after a while. What is the information needed for the lesion analysis? So we can go to any herd management software, and I listed a few here: AFI, Bovazinc, Dericom, Delpro, DHI Plus, Lely, PC Dart. We need cow ID, lactation number, and calving date. And what we need from the hoof trimming software is date of hoof trimming, proper lesion identification, and simplicity is the game. Because again, we're going to see this down the road. We're going to look at 3 or 4 or mostly 5. What should hoof lesion analysis answer? First of all, we want to answer, are we trimming enough cows? Are we trimming the right cows? Are we identifying lame cows, or are they diagnosed at hoof trimming? Where are the hoof lesions occurring? By date, by days in milk, by lactation, by limb. Those are crucial things. Are the lameness prevention strategies yielding the desired results? That's what it's going to tell us. Are we succeeding? Are we meeting our KPIs? Okay, so a little example here. This is a 750 cow milking herd, and we trim about 130 cows per month on this particular farm. You can see here, these are all the trims. Down here, the blue ones are the lame ones. So every month there is some lame ones from 1 to, I think the highest is 8. We'll see that later on. Average lameness at this dairy is 56, and there's 54 lame cows diagnosed in the last 12 months. Farm is doing about 42 liters of milk. We're going to see a little more about this farm as we move on. The main lesion analysis creates an action plan. And one of the things we all have to remember is that every lesion has a cause. Every one. Every lesion can be prevented. I'm not saying 100%. As long as we have cows, we're going to have a small amount of lame cows. Investigate 2 clawhorn disruption lesions, and 1 infectious lesion. Sole ulcer, white line lesions, and digital dermatitis. So, problem list for sole ulcers, okay? And what you guys, while you're watching this video on the side, this is one of the reasons this particular farm had a very high incidence of sole ulcers, toe ulcers, and white line lesions. So, poor cow comfort is one of the things. It's one of the risk factors or the problem list. Poor beds. Time budgets, forced standing, when we force the cows to stand in headlocks, holding pens, especially those are the 2 main ones. Heat stress, again, heat stress has to do with standing and hoof trimming. And you can see here, for the people that understand hoof trimming, they understand why this farm had a high problem, lots of problems with sole ulcers, white line, and also toe ulcers. In the meantime, this has been repaired or has been improved. Sole ulcers, just like we call this a typical area. This is a typical area where sole ulcers always occur, outside hind claws. They always should be blocked and rested. Okay, this cow received the block before she left the chute, and it would have been trimmed as well more. So this is just an early sign of the view of the sole ulcer. So both of these are pretty mild sole ulcers, pretty early detected. One of the things here, I'm going back to the research work from Yasuki in Hokkaido, Japan. And one of the things here when it comes to sole ulcers is very interesting data. What you guys can see here, the gray line is the low temperature of the day or the time. The orange line or brown line is the high temperature. And what you can see here, date April 16 to 2017, December 2017. High temperature was 25 degrees Celsius. Okay, but look at what happened to sole ulcers. As the ambient temperature increased, sole ulcers went up, and they peaked in September and October after the heat. So after July, so that 2 months delayed, just like we showed earlier. The next year was a little bit better, but we still had a peak like in September. October was down a little bit already. So this could have said that maybe it was it was hotter in August. That's why that affected them more or even into September a little bit. So when we look at the sole ulcers, when we look at that in days and milk, in the same time period, okay, we can see here a lot of sole ulcers in early lactation, okay? Now the thing here is, why is this happening? Okay, there's a couple of things. Dry cow cooling might not be there. Dry cow heat abatement, maybe dry cow comfort. The other thing we have to understand is, and we'll talk about that towards the end, high production cows produce a lot more heat. Hot cows stand. We know that. If you guys listen to Nigel Cook's webinar here about a month ago, he clearly pointed that out, and now it makes all sense to us when we look at this data. So stall comfort, you can see here we have fans in the center row, but no fans out here. Now I can't tell you if these cows didn't lay down because of the cow comfort or because they were hot. Again, these are early lactation cows, as we can see here, big udders, okay, producing more heat. The same thing here. Here we've got a ventilation up here, but not at the head of the cow where it needs to be happening. Plus there is light when they're laying down. There's sunlight shining in through the holes, not allowing cows to lay down. And both of these farms I've been to on a visiting basis, they had a high incidence of sole ulcers. The other thing is milking times from gate open to gate close. And in 2003, when Nigel Cook put this time budget together, 3 hours of milking time, a lot of those farms were we're on twice a day, smaller herds. What happened after that is we increased the herd size, sometimes overcrowded the pens or added onto the pens. Now, all of a sudden, we're putting more cows in that holding pen. They're spending more time in the milking center, and there's heat accumulation. So for me, in 2003, this was acceptable. Today, 3 hours. Today, on 3 times a day, we should be less than 2.5 hours in some cases, because the longer they're in there, the hotter they get. And we have good data to back this up. The next thing is choosing not to functionally trim heifers prior to first calving. It could result in damage. So here, this is a heifer 30 days after calving, and you can see both outside hind claws show inflammation and redness, damage. So the redness comes from inflammation. Maybe we didn't get a sole ulcer out of this, but we know that the damage is already done. If they have damage in the first lactation, much more likely to recur again in the second lactation, okay? So we need to make sure that in those time periods that those heifers have a good start, so they don't have a higher risk of developing sole ulcers later in life. So when we look at this here, this is what a good trimming looks like. And I'm going to run both videos at the same time. On the left side, it's a mid-lactation trim. On the right side, it's a heifer trim before calving, a heifer that comes out of confinement, confinement-free stall barn. And you can see here, it's a left rear on the older milk cow, on the milk cow. It's a right rear on the heifer, but very similarly done. Very similarly done. We make sure that where the sole ulcer side is, I'm not sure why it's not playing here. So we'll go through here. It doesn't want to play, but we'll show some pictures afterwards yet. So we're going on for the problem list for white line lesions. One of them is trauma, slipping, rough and uneven floors, cow handling, stockmanship, perching in stalls, heat stress, and hoof trimming. And we saw the hoof trimming. I'm going back to the same study in Hokkaido. And you can see here, the white lines also peaked, but we didn't have a sharp of a peak as we did with the sole ulcers. We have a little flatter curve. So it goes on a little bit longer, maybe because it's caused by different things. There's other things involved in that. Standing is definitely a thing on that. And you can also see a very high incidence of white lines in early lactation, which brings me back to, you know, the dry cow cooling, the dry cow hoof health. Maybe those dry cows just didn't look that good, or they weren't trimmed before they were going dry, or there could be multiple reasons. But it's interesting to see again that in the wintertime, it wasn't as critical. We can see when the temperatures was higher at that 25 degrees, following that, there was more white line lesions. So that's just something to always keep in mind, because those two hang together. We can see here on another farm, we went from, in 2017, 2018, we went from 110% stocking rate to 130% stocking rate. And you can see in the graphs very nicely here, we can see in the graphs very nicely that there's definitely a lot more white line lesions the second year around. You know, it goes higher, there's more of them. There is more of them throughout that time period. Again, from June to November, basically, beginning in November. So heat accumulation, you know. So what's happening is like unstable floors. We can see here not having the flat floors, and then we've got the cobblestone surface, the slippery surface. Those are contributing to that. And when cows stand, I can go along and look at my records over the years that this was one of my dairies, you know, more standing. That was years ago before we improved the free stalls. But you can also see there is no heat abatement in here. And then here on the right hand side, we've got dry cows. They're not laying down because probably too big for the stalls, or again, the heat abatement is missing for those dry cows. And what it ends up to be afterwards, it ends up to be lameness. The next thing is these are two videos they're going to play. And you can see on the left-hand side, heads up. So basically this holding pen on the left here is made to hold about 150 cows, but we got 220 cows in there. And then the next thing on the right-hand side is when you can see now as this crowd gate moves forward, or the backing gate moves forward, this is a big reason why white line lesions happen. A very big reason. This is actually a farm where I was called out to find out a problem because they had a lot of white line lesions, especially in the summertime and early lactation. And because when those cows are in that early lactation stage, they're hotter because they produce more milk, creates more body heat. And again, if we're packing more cows in there because we added on to the barn, or we're overcrowding, and then what the holding pen is made for. So, and if we have some grazes on here, when we look at white line lesions from grazing, it's the long distance, so the repetitive motion, and then the steep slopes. So when cows move down steep slopes, we always see an increase in white line lesions in those situations. So the next thing we're going to look at is the problem list for digital dermatitis. Poor hygiene, resulting in poor skin health, creates an anaerobic environment. We're going to see that in a little bit. Later, untreated acute lesions drive further future new infections. Caustic hoof bath solutions cause skin deterioration and more, especially in the milking herd, more chronic lesions over time. And we all have to remember that this disease is starting in heifers at 10 months of age. So if we're not looking after our heifers in our digital dermatitis control, we're missing the greatest opportunity. And there's information on that on there. So DD in heifers will drive the infection in the milking cows. So digital dermatitis, we can see here the various stages of it. The primary cause is the breakdown in the immune system, compromised skin integrity, opportunity for bacteria to enter, the bacteria already in the environment, especially if we have chronic lesions like this or like this, and the bacteria need a low oxygen environment. We have to understand that placing bacteria that cause digital dermatitis on healthy skin will not result in digital dermatitis. So, very good example here. This particular place, constant inoculation. It's challenging. So new infections happen because you can see even up here on those cows that their socks are dirty, their feet are dirty. No hoof baths will eventually cut through this thickness of manure. So it deteriorates the skin and makes them a higher risk for contracting digital dermatitis. At this particular farm, over 7,500 cows, no digital dermatitis in the last 12 months. All the claws look like that. This is cleaned or scraped or flushed while the cows are out. So we don't have automatic scrapers inoculating those cows on a continuous basis. So one of the things here is just to show you what hygiene, improving hygiene does. We're going back to the same dairy that we looked at it earlier, the 450 cow dairy. In June of 2015, we ran the sodium hypochlorite in the hoof baths just as a cleaning agent. We did that twice a week. And what you can see here, what happened in the next year, we went from 190 M2 digital dermatitis to less than 90, more than half cut because we had cleaned their feet. You can see here the M4 lesions, they went slowly down, but just 2 years later, it was more than a 50% cut. So we went down to 25 cases from roughly almost 100 cases. So nearly a 75 reduction by just making sure the feet were cleaner, because we couldn't do anything with the environment. It was a 3-row barn overcrowded with organic bedding. The important thing for anybody listening here is to make sure to start DD checks in the heifer pens at 10 months of age. When they're locked up, when they're eating, walk behind them, check for the lesions, okay? You know, those are suspicious. They're probably already had them. They're already on the receiving return side of it, but you can see here, the heels are fairly dirty. On this one, it's probably because she has digital dermatitis. So a very important thing to understand. With digital dermatitis, it's really crucial that we catch them at an early stage, at the M2 stage, at the early acute stage. They're highly responsive to a topical application of tetracycline. In both of these cases, you can see even on the right there, we have I'm showing a small application with tetracycline. That's what we have here in the US for the acute lesions, 2 grams of tetracycline. And I protected it with a light wrap for 24 hours. And the farms I work with are very good on removing those, or there is actually simple things that I can do that those wraps within 10 to 12 hours actually, or 20 hours fall off. That's the light amount of wrap that's used. It's just to protect that treatment for anywhere up to 3 to 6 hours, and we should have the job done. What we can see here, at this particular area, that's the last 2 years, 20 to 21, the chronological comparison of digital dermatitis. We can see here, we're coming down. My M4 cows are coming down, which means I have, with having less M2s or M1s, we also get less M4s. So if we treat them earlier, so we were more intense with looking after the heifers in the last 3-4 years. So we're more intense about making sure lame cows get treated or digital dermatitis gets diagnosed early and treated early. And you can see here, we probably in the last year, we see it in the data later, maybe a half a dozen cows with acute digital dermatitis in the milking herd. Another thing to see here in this same dairy, and that's what data shows us, as we reduced digital dermatitis, and you can see the steep decline over the 5 years. Here, where we showed this before, where we introduced the hypochlorite. Look at what happened to clawhorn lesions. Clawhorn lesions almost went down in the same increment. So as we reduce digital dermatitis, we also reduce clawhorn lesions. After this 2017, we went into an expansion, moved into a new barn, we changed the environment, and we just saw the data, what happened there. So how do we establish an action plan? Lameness is a multifactorial disease. We must understand the risk factors for the various lesions, and we just looked at the 3 main ones right now. They have to be considered when we build new facilities, when we put together action plans. And prevention requires multiple actions. The management team must collect and analyze that data, because only then we can do the right thing afterwards. And the management team must instigate the change. The thing I see a lot of times that the actions require accountability and follow through. And sometimes we're not so committed because, well, it's been going like this for a while, but now we have even better information with the data that I just showed you. with all of those things that we can have low lameness herds by going after that. So I want to bring in something here quick that has to do with hoof trimming. When we look at this circle, it's the whole lactation cycle. And you can see here, we have close up fresh and we have peak lactation period. For me, the red are high risk intervention periods. We should not intervene with hoof trimming during these periods. And that's why we have a window here, right 21 days before in the dry period, but also I have a window here from 30 to 45 days. I used to trim cows in this period and I do less and less. If there's a lame cow, of course I have to look at it. But I've been trying on most of the farms to get this past the 90 days, or a lot of places today, we go past 100, 120 days, because that's our peak production. That's when we're trying to get the cows bred, when we want to have those cows peak. And what I see is in my herds, it really has shown in the production end of it, because those herds are, most of those herds are 100 pounds per cow per day, or 43 to 45 kilos per cow per day. And the goal here is for me that we have no lameness in those high risk periods. So the prevention has to work. So that if we have to do a recheck in this 30 to 45 days, so she's not going to come lame in that peak production period, I think that's the best way. We need to focus more on that. We need to do this for the cows and for our bottom line. So what's the action plan for this 750 cow dairy today? We'll trim all the spring and heifers 3 to 8 weeks before calving. We assess every lactation animal between 120, 140 days. The other thing we do is the problem list cows trim, the rear feet are trimmed every 90 days. And that's what I start between 30 and 45 days. Just give them a checkup. Sometimes I don't even do anything, but just take a quick peek at it to see if they have some hemorrhaging or something that went wrong during the dry period. We train the staff for acute lame cow identification, and it works awesome, because those guys, these workers don't want to work with lame cows. If a cow is not walking right, she gets put on the list. She's looked, if she's acutely lame, she gets looked at within 24 to 36 hours. Sometimes by me, sometimes by the farm staff. And we do checkups on treated lame cows 28 to 35 days following treatment to make sure the cows recovered. And that's our main thing, that we have no chronic lame cows at this farm. Okay, because we don't have we have a no lameness tolerance policy. It has really succeeded. So one thing is, when we built the new facility, we learned over the last 10 years that floors are hugely important. We cut all the grooves in the floors. We put the floors flat, cut all the grooves in, and these are the dimensions: a 1/2 inch deep, about 2.5 inches flat in the center, and then a 3/4 inch wide groove on each side. Because with this type of pattern, we've learned, and you can see it in the video, it's a really secure walking surface. We can see it in the video here. In this particular one, you can see this is the inside of the barn here. Excellent cow comfort. This is on a day where it's over 90-degree temperature. Humidity index was probably 85. This was an hour after milking. And what you can see here, what's happening with the cows when you got secure floors. These are first and second lactation going to milking. And one of the problems I deal with here is deals from the cows running. And when you guys look at this closer, look at those forces, how they come down on those feet. They're so secure on this floor, they wouldn't run otherwise. And my problems that I deal with here are more, we're going to see that in the data, is more from running today than the common problems. So it's more from the running, that force that comes down on those main claws, on the medial claw in the back, on the lateral claws in the front. And this is, it's not a daily thing, but sometimes it'd be nice if we could put a speed bump in for those cows. But which tells me is that when we put put in good facilities, sand beds, the right ventilation. This is a small cross vent. Production never varied all summer, the last 2 summers, or the last 3 summers in this new building. It stays. Lameness, we can see, we're going to see that right now. We can see here on the graphs, so from March of last year to October of this year, we had a little peak there, a little peak into October, but not really that much. And it's mostly normal trimming, hemorrhaging of the sole. Those are my older chronic cows. Okay. Those are my cows that get looked at more often. And you can see here, we had white line abscesses. We had them in May, June, and there was quite a few of them there. And again, before the heat. So mostly those white line abscesses I'm dealing with here are not the typical ones, are the ones when cows are happy, when they're running to the milking parlor. And we'll see that in data. So the timely trimming here, we don't have a lot of sole ulcers. We had there's a sole ulcer here. There's a sole ulcer back here. And I think a couple of them here, and all the rest of it here in that color is actually foot rot. So when we look at it here, this shows a little closer by days in milk. So you can see here, we had some foot rot here, abscess of the white line, abscess of the white line. Okay. The other thing here is minimum lesions are occurring in our peak periods. Okay. We get some white lines here in the 1 to 30 days. And again, it could be coming out of the dry period. Okay. It could be just the running of the cows, because that's most of these white lines, we'll see this afterwards, are actually in the front feet. You can see here when we do the main trimming, okay, intervention period, that's the 30 to 45 days. We see a couple extra, we see probably some hemorrhaging, mostly at that particular time. And then also the mid-lactation trim. That's where we see most of the hemorrhaging, especially on the older cows. And one of the things here in this particular herd, we probably have over 30% of the cows today are 4th lactation and over, which we never had it that way. We were around 20% before. And then back here, we have the dry cow trim. And you can see here between the dry cow trim and between the mid-lactation trim and white line trim, very little one. And then here at the end of the lactation, these are sometimes some late lactation cows. We're trying to solve this with these white line lesions that just should be trimmed. And sometimes they're not trimmed because we're going to sell them anyway soon. So the other thing here is when you look at these lesions by lactation, we can see here that first lactation, we have some white lines. Second lactation, like the blue, but the hemorrhaging is mostly in 4th lactation and over. That's my older cows. Even there, that's where a couple of those toe ulcers show up. Some of those toe ulcers show up. So, and when we look at it by limb, you can see here, most of the white line lesions are on the left front. A high percentage of them, nearly 20 of them are on the left front. The other ones are maybe a quarter of it. And the left front is from when they're running and they're stopping, their left front is like they're part of the brake, because when they're turning right, it's the left front that has to help them steer around where they're going. So that's common knowledge. When we look at the chronological comparison of these top 6 lesions in this theory, you can see here, we made a huge improvement from last year over this year. And I went 10 months on each side. So we went from March to October of this year. And you can see here the hemorrhaging stayed the same, even though our older cows, we have more 4th lactation cows and over. So it's because we do a better job of the prevention in the early end. The other thing you can see here is the foot rot. We had 5 this year compared to 10 last year. Sole ulcers, we had 8 last year. We're at 4 this year. There's one more since the data was taken. And you can see here, toe ulcers are about the same. Toe ulcers again here, the biggest thing here has to do with the running of those cows, with having happy cows. Conclusion, Dairy farming, dairy is an incredible business. High-producing dairy cows can stay healthy and productive. We must implement best practice prevention. Fertilities and cow comfort are crucial. Heat abatement is probably the most important thing that was greatly overlooked, and it has to be done on dry cows. It has to be done on high-yielding cows. We have to remember, holding pens are not a place to have cows. We have so much more research and understanding, and that's our driving force today. I know VES-Artex does a great job of making sure that we have cooler cows all over the world. The data and knowledge providing the tools. And the action plans must start with the foundation and awareness for healthy hoofs. So when we look at key performance indicators, and these are good goals, we can have less than 2% digital dermatitis, acute lesions, less than 2% sole ulcers. This is possible. White line lesions, less than 5%. Again, I showed some of the risk factors. Sand definitely has an advantage for many places. Laying down time, traction, but the right floors, the right grooving make a big difference. The other thing is a good indicator is lesions in the first 60 days in milk should be less than 4%. I could even cut that down to 2% in sometimes. Lesion in lactation 1, less than 5%. Heifers shouldn't have much for lesions if we do some prevention. I don't see sole ulcers in heifers. I see white lines, and again, it's from the running. All cows with 1 lesion per year should be less than 10%. Like at this particular area, we're at 6%, which again, if it wouldn't be for the running, we'd have less lesions. Get lame, stay lame, less than 2%. The goal is here to not have any. So if we treat them early, we do the proper treatments, we do prevention, we can get that to less than 1%. And I want to conclude with this. We've been talking about heat, and we know that the resting human produces about 200 BTUs per hour. Okay, when we look at a cow that produces 27 kilos of milk or 60 pounds of milk produces about 2,500 BTUs. That's a hairdryer, one hairdryer on low. A cow that produces 80 pounds produces about 4,000 BTUs, avoiding 200 BTUs per hour. And then a cow that produces 45 kilos or 100 pounds produces 6,000 BTUs per hour. That's a hairdryer on high. And one of the things I want you all to think about listening to this, when you're putting 200, 100-pound cows in the holding pen, body to body, remember for the people that have ever been on a subway during rush hour, on a 180 degree, 90 degree day with high humidity, those cows cannot be cooled well in the holding pen. If they come hot out of the holding pen, they will not lay down. And that's something that has happened that we haven't watched very closely. I think that's the next thing we need to look at is what's happening to the cows as they come out of the holding pen, especially the ones that get milked the last 50 or the last 100 cows that stood in there for 45 minutes, baking in that heat from that everybody's producing. So with that, I thank you everybody for listening, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Now, we did have 2 questions that came in, and one of them was about the schedule for dairy cattle trimming, but you've covered that already. So what I will say is that we have a copy of Karl's presentation, and we will provide that to you in the email that'll go out after the webinar. The other question that we have is, what are the latest thoughts and recommendations on rubber flooring in targeted areas such as holding areas and feed lanes?
Okay. Good question. So for me, targeted places for rubber, I like to use rubber where we have 90-degree turns, 90-degree sharp turns, like coming out of a holding pen. Parlor decks with parallel parlors where they come out and they turn sharp right or sharp left. Generally in the holding pens, one of the things we have to understand is a cow still stands when she's on rubber, even though if she's in a holding pen, it doesn't do anything for the heat. Is it more comfortable to stand? It is more comfortable to stand. But one of the things we also have to understand is sometimes if it's more comfortable to stand, is that why they're not loading the parlor as well? So what I like to do is I like to put rubber like in the first 5 meters or 20 feet in front of the parlor, because we want cows to move up and walk into that parlor. If the floors are slippery, sometimes people have put rubber in there. The feeding lane, I'm not a proponent for that because I could have showed some more data on a couple of farms where we actually had rubber in the feeding lane, and the producer said, how come in the one pen where we have rubber, there's always more no rubber, there's always more cows laying down than in the other ones? Because if the stalls aren't perfect, so if we don't have good deep bedded stalls, cows choose to stand. A standing cow for me is always a lame cow. And we see just what the heat does. Okay, so we need to do everything possible to get them to lay down, to get them off their feet. Rubber is more comfortable to stand, but if it's more comfortable to stand, lameness will be the results. And we need to think more about that wind speed at that 30 inches, not 30 inches, at that 1.5 foot or 20 inches where the head is at the cow when she's laying down. I think that's a much more important thing today, to have that and have comfortable beds.
Perfect. Thank you very much. There was a question about the grooves and the image in the grooves, but what I will say is that that's in Karl's presentation, and we will send that off as well. So another question that came in is, why is it that under certain circumstances on some farm, action plans put in place fail?
Yeah, it's because we're not committed to really make things better. And I think what it does is it takes a combined effort. So on the farm team, we have to get together, that the hoof trimmer has to get involved, the nutritionist and the veterinarian and the farm owners. I think it's very crucial. Like on this particular dairy, I was heavily involved in the construction of it, making the floors and the Dairyland Initiative. Nigel Cook was with the ventilation at that time. And that's why we've got all the good things, and they were committed. They knew that tapping into the right people, getting the right information, they would be successful, and they are. We're utilizing 20% less heifers today than we did 4 years ago, because we don't need them, because we have too many cows as it is. So we can selectively cull.
Perfect. And how often do you scrape the floor with auto manure scrapers? And how often do you increase the floor grooving?
So with automatic scrapers, I would say is we have to run those continuously, because we don't want to have a lot of manure in front of those scrapers, because the more manure there is in front of those scrapers, the more it gets the feet dirty. Okay. And trying to get rid of the slop with a pipe in the center with a drain actually makes the manure even more sticky, more dirty feet. So hygiene is the most important part. Most of the farms that milk 3 times a day, today they either use the vacuum system where they suck the manure up, or they scrape it with a tire while the cows are in for milking. And what I'm seeing there is our flushing, the flush barns. If the cows are exposed to too much manure, and today we build more generous alleys, bigger alleys, so the manure doesn't get as deep in those alleys between between scrapings, and that's how we keep the hoofs cleaner. And that's why we run the hoof bath less. We have a better chance to, or we just have less digital dermatitis in those cases.
Thank you very much. So that's just about time for us. Thank you, Karl, for coming out. We really appreciate this. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We'll send out a recording of the video or recording of the webinar as well as Karl's presentation. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Karen, and thanks everybody for listening.